All right, welcome back to the channel. Was going through Twitter, man, and ran into a very interesting interview by Keith Thurman. Keith, once upon a time, Thurman, talking about Terence Crawford. Let's go over that in this video. All right, welcome back. Keith Thurman talks about Terence Crawford and the WB no, as in nobody wants that belt. Man, Keith Thurman, I'll tell you, man, for somebody that did a lot of ducking, a lot of dodging, he's a funny guy, man. He's a funny guy. So he was on this talk show with a couple guys that you see on DAZN a lot. I can't remember their names, but they're out of New York. It seems like maybe an Islamic guy or a Puerto Rican guy. I can't tell what he is, and a black guy that do this podcast. And Keith Thurman was on the podcast, and one of them asked about, you know, one of the big issues that are in the media in boxing, which is the PBC fighting fighters from Top Rank. And as it applies to Keith Thurman, we're talking obviously about the welterweight division. So Keith Thurman has some really interesting stuff to say, and we're going to go through that. We'll dissect it, give you our thoughts on that. Before I get into it in detail, though, I want to welcome you back to the channel. Subscribers, if you're not subscribed, I hope you accept my invitation to subscribe and hit the bell icon, and you'll be notified of when we release more videos. As far as videos, though, I do want to give you an apology for yesterday. The audio track was off, so there's like 3 videos that were uploaded that has really kind of grainy sound to it, but we'll be re-uploading those today, a little bit later today, and replacing it. So if, you know, hopefully you can go back and, you know, look at them again. If you liked them, just like them again so that they can go back. The corrected version can be in your liked category on your channel. Also, thank you to everybody that supports on the Patreon. Thank you to everybody that supports as a channel member. You guys are greatly appreciated, and everybody that comes through the live streams Monday through Friday and OG Boxing Talk on Sunday. So Keith Thurman was asked by one of the two guys that on the panel said, "Hey Keith, what about Terence Crawford versus the PBC guys?" And the gist of his question was that, hey, my understanding is, and he was speaking specifically of Terence Crawford. He said, you know, if Terence Crawford has a deal with ESPN and it is a deal with Top Rank, so he has to fight on ESPN, he has to fight on Top Rank. But guys on the PBC they're not signed to promotional contracts and they can go to any network that they want to go to. Wouldn't it be on the guys from the PBC to go make the fight with Terence Crawford? And now that is something that you hear a lot of people make that argument. Personally, I think that is, you know, it's not quite fair to either guy. I mean, it's not fair to the guys at PBC to say, hey, you know, we want you to fight Terence Crawford. And Terence Crawford got himself into a situation where he's tied to a promoter and he's tied to a network. So you guys need to enter into negotiations with somebody that might ultimately cost you a little money in order for us to get the fights, because the responsibility is on you for what he did. And see, that's my take on it, as far as like the necessity for one guy to go out of their way to try to fight the other guy. As it relates to like the promotional thing. I want to see the fights, but just when people make that argument, it sounds funny to me. And Keith Thurman brought up the point, and I thought he made a pretty persuasive argument. It was like, oh, we got to go over there. Yeah, some of us have more flexible deals than Terence Crawford does. I do want to point out, though, that Terence Crawford, from what I understand, does not have a network deal. Vasily Lomachenko doesn't have a network deal at ESPN. He has a deal with Top Rank. ESPN, there's been several Top Rank fighters that have gone over to fight on DAZN. Jose Ramirez fought on DAZN. Lomachenko fought on DAZN. I have a hard time believing that Lomachenko doesn't have a network deal with ESPN as much as they praise him. And or Jose Ramirez can go over to the Zone, but Terence Crawford can't go over to Fox or can't go over to Showtime. I do want to correct the record on that. I've never heard about Terence Crawford having a network deal. I know Terence Crawford has a promotional deal. But what Sean Porter said, Keith Thurman said, hey, why would, some of us have more flexibility than Terence Crawford does, but why should we go over there for one guy? And he started listing off the fights that he could make with Showtime, or with the PBC, which is Fox and Showtime. He said, if I want to, I can fight Danny, I can fight Sean, I can fight Manny, I can fight Bronner, I can fight Errol Spence, I could fight Ugas. He said, and if I feel like it, I could fight Mikey Garcia. That's 7 guys that he named off, 7 fights that he could make without having to go and enter into a contract negotiation with Bob Arum. And he says, it's not my fault that I've got all of these options over here in the PBC, but you want me to go over there and enter negotiations with another network for one guy. But then the killer was, he said, and if you know what you're talking about in boxing, you know that we call the WBO the WB no, as in nobody wants that belt. So now when he called it the WB no, this is why I thought that was interesting. And it's related to a heavyweight, Lennox Lewis. If you recall, Lennox Lewis, I think it was it's either Jim Gray or Steve Farhood. I can't remember which one. I conflate those two guys oftentimes, man. But yeah, it was either Steve Farhood or Jim Gray. More than likely it was Steve Farhood that talked about the last undisputed champions, and somebody left Lennox Lewis off that list. And Lennox Lewis was like, hold on, man, I was undisputed. When I was fighting, nobody cared about the WBO. If I thought that the WBO was a legitimate championship belt at the time, I would have went and got the WBO. And what a lot of people forget is that the WBO is the last of the sanctioning bodies to come around to be considered a major championship belt. And really, it's only considered a major championship belt because Top Rank it's closely associated to Top Rank, and Top Rank was touting it as a championship belt. And Top Rank has its fighters fight for that belt and as a result pay the sanctioning fees for that belt. But it was not a belt for the vast majority of the time that I've been watching boxing. Anybody considered it to be a major belt. It's very much like the IBO now. Now, if you notice the IBO, when Anthony Joshua I've got 4 belts. When Anthony Joshua beat Joseph Parker, all of a sudden he had 4 belts. I've got 4 belts. How many belts does Deontay Wilder has? Deontay Wilder only has 1. I've got 4 belts. Well, he's counting the IBO, and there's nobody out there that considers the IBO to be a major championship belt. But with those sanctioning bodies, it's kind of like that. If you keep saying it long enough and you say it to enough people are going to start believing it. And you have people who start paying attention to boxing, relatively recently, and from the time that they're paying attention to boxing, they hear the WBO is a major championship belt, and it just comes to be that way, right? And that is why I believe that Keith Thurman, well, the beginning, what is it? That's the source or the beginning of that idea that the WBC isn't, it's not something that people are going out of their way looking for. It's not, if there's, of all the 4 belts, man, the major championship belts, it's the one that's least credible. And for me, the reason, aside from the reason it was the last come around, the reason why I find that belt to be the least credible is because it's the one that is most clearly political. And you can look up and down the WBO rankings. The WBO rankings are pretty much good. What it's good for right now is breaking up undisputed championships, because the WBO, you have up and down is top rank, it's golden boy, but most significantly, it is the whatever Bob orders belts. You can see like Terence Crawford was the WBO champion at 135 pounds. Then he became the WBO champion at 140 pounds. Became the WBO champion at 147 pounds. He got that WBO belt at 147 pounds right now. When he goes, say he goes to 154 or whatever he does and he doesn't have it, you can bet your bottom dollar that, or maybe not your bottom dollar, but your last $2 or $3, you know, some of them, you can bet a good amount of money that that WBO belt is going to go to another top ranked fighter. And you put that on top of the fact that that people don't really respect the WBO because it's so political, and the fact that there's so many options over there at the PBC. That's what should force Terence Crawford. That has to force Terence Crawford's hand. But Terence Crawford won't do it. Go fight Sean Porter. Beating Sean Porter will give him the credibility that he needs, and it will cut off one of those options, okay? I'll leave credibility alone. It'll cut off one of the 7 options they have to fight besides you. Same thing for Ugas. But anyway, it is what it is. Let me know what you think in the comments.